Hello and welcome to my replay webinar presentation on information processing theory, conducted during my master's degree course in Psychology 620 Learning and Cognition. The delegating professor is Dr. Arthur Swisher. My name is Nicole Morris, an honorary student at the University of Arizona's Global Campus. In this exclusive webinar, I will analyze and discuss the information processing theory for psychological education purposes. Let's continue to the first slide. The main objective of this webinar presentation on information processing is to demonstrate further understanding of the framework and mental processing in which information becomes absorbed externally through our sensory and then stored in our memory uptake that consists of short-term and long-term memory, and we'll get more into that in the next few slides here. Okay, so we see on the next slide, information processing theory is the cornerstone of psychology, because information processing theory is the framework of how information process and becomes elaborated in mental cognitions. Mediano, et al., 2022, surmises that the brain is metaphorically comparative to the internal infrastructures of a computer. Thus, our brain is the human equivalent of a CPU, or in other words, the central processing unit section in the human body, which is kind of neat if you think about it. The sensory is encodable, and it computes through external sensory from our environment and delivered to our short-term memory and our long-term memory. We see on this slide the theory explained. Information processing, or the body's computer region, has three stages in which information becomes encoded before reaching its final destination, known as long-term memory. These are sensory memory, short-term memory, or working memory. It's the equivalent in the computer terminology as would be the processor. Finally, long-term memory, and is comparable to the computer's hard drive. Memory works together by encoding information that it's gathered through a retrieval process from external environmental information. First, it absorbs through sensory, But it has to also be detected, because a lot of information that's external oftentimes goes undetected. Kamina et al. 2017 affirm sensory memory consists of visual information and is known as iconic, while auditory retrieval is referred to as our echoic memory. So that's good information to absorb. I've provided a couple slides that I want you guys to thoroughly examine, because I feel it is important to also get visuals of explanations, just so our brains can process information a little better. Gaining visual knowledge of the complexity of our mind's fundamental way in which we process information is important to build on the knowledge that we already have about information processing theory. Again, here is another slide representing the complexity in which our brains process external information that we retrieve from our environment. After the information becomes absorbed through an intricate process of internalization in our mind's neural pathways, the information storing and discarding, it disregards and forgets information that it finds irrelevant. On this slide, there's a plethora of information that we need to go through. There are 3 associated strategies based on the theory of information processing and how to apply them. What's imperative to understand is information processing in the field of psychology helps us connect the dots as we treat clients, and also aids us in therapeutic treatments. Because if we understand how a client uptakes and absorbs their information, and if they're impacted in some way, you know, how we can further also treat that. And that's why I want to go into PTSD associated with EMDR therapy, and also AIP, which is adaptive information process. Because when we can't process information, we adapt it through different pathways in our brain, which doesn't always help. As you see, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, information gets absorbed and becomes highly interrupted and clouded when we experience trauma. Vasserling et al. 2018 affirm normative uptake of information becomes problematic for information process when someone has PTSD. They can't absorb information externally in their environment like a normal brain would. This is where EMDR therapy comes in. Eye movement desensitization reprocessing. That's when a person cannot process information normally because of a trauma. They need to reprogram their brain's CPU, metaphorically speaking. Castanovio et al. 2019 confirms that maladaptive stored memories of trauma create issues so significant that rational processing of information becomes significantly disruptive. Thus, EMDR helps restore normal uptake and retrieval of information processing abilities that were once blocked in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, and how adaptive information processing comes into play and connects all of these allocations is the theory analyzes and further researches the observed results of EMDR therapy. Hayes et al. 2017 surmise that AIP theory was created as a guide when psychologists utilize EMDR therapy. The reason this information is imperative is trauma is stored in the brain's neural networks. AIP was developed to further understand how we can reroute the neural pathways using EMDR to cure and help ease the trauma. When healing these damaged neurons, one can exhibit uptake of normative information processing. So in other words, after one undergoes EMDR therapy, their normal uptake of external environmental information becomes less cloudy, and they can absorb without the brain fog and the recall of traumatic memories. Even though they're always going to be congruent, they'll be less painful and help the person manage their information process better day to day. Applying the theories, one can see the picture that I put on as an example between normal information processing and those that have experienced trauma. They just don't gather the information the same. So applying the theories in practice, congruent to PTSD, EMDR, and AIP for psychological practices in organizations ensures that psychologists have current substantive knowledge. So studying, researching, and analyzing, observing, utilizing all this information when treating clients, they can gather knowledge of how beneficial it is to people. XU et al. 2022 affirm that memory brain synapses can be further used to explain one's cognition as information passes through retention and recall of stored memories. People with PTSD need therapies like EMDR to adapt their information processing abilities. Thus, they are adaptive in their information processing normal abilities. Therefore, psychologists need to understand how these theories intertwine with each other introspectively so that further analysis can be made. I hope you guys have been enjoying my webinar presentation so far. If you have any questions about the material that I've covered so far, please leave it in the comments section below and I'll be happy to answer. And any additional thoughts or comments or questions about any additional material that we're going to cover after this, please just leave them below. Thank you. The first question ascertained was by Miss Anita Arnold, and she asks, how can researchers confirm the correlation between normal information processing and those with trauma, and if they will indeed benefit from the methodologies that you are speculating? Well, to answer your question, excuse me, PTSD treatment involving EMDR therapy ensures cognitive restructuring by recalling memories that were abroad through information processing by means of induced trauma. To eliminate skepticism, inquiry shows there has been a plethora of neuropsychologists that have actually utilized functional magnetic resonance imagery, fMRI, to analyze neurological pathways between normal and trauma-induced brains, and those who have received treatment before and after. So they actually have physical findings to show support of the variations between normal brain, trauma-induced brains, and those who have actually received therapy through EMDR. The supporting evidence shows neuropsychologist Chung et al., 2019, he confirms when using brain imaging technology known as fMRI, they use auditory paired with magnetic resonance to view the areas of the brain which oxygen and blood flow form. So, thank you for asking that crucial question. This slide I wanted to show a diagram depicting the distinctions between a normal brain and a PTSD brain, and how there's differences significantly in how they each processes information differently. Please take a minute to examine this diagram. Thank you. This is a slide of an actual fMRI between two brains. The one on the left is a normal brain. The one on the right is somebody that suffers from PTSD, so you can actually visually see the physical differences between the two brains. Having physical fMRIs as additional proof, other than clinical observations, ascertains the neurological pathways in which our externally absorbed information travels through our brain, in telling where data is stored concretely, both in our normal and trauma-inflicted brains. So it's good having that physical imagery to actually look at and observe. This is a slide containing a depiction of one singular brain before and after. The one on the left has experienced the trauma, and then the imagery on the right has been through EMDR therapy. So you can see the variance between the two pictures, and you can actually see the reduction in the trauma. Studying, research, and analyzing information from fMRIs ensures relevancy to the psychological allocations formed for information processing. On this diagram depiction, we see the two variations between the unprocessed memories and processed memories. The reason why this is so important is releasing traumatizing memories helps the brain become clear and get back to a normal state of information processing. Recall, retrieval, and stored memories due to unrestricted frontal cortex. Lab et al. 2017 affirms that the adaptive information processing theory concludes after EMDR therapy that the maladaptive stored memories are reconstructed and adaptive in the brain's prefrontal cortex neural networking system, meaning the brain's, figuratively speaking, CPU can become unclogged and free of, viruses, if we're speaking on computer terminology, that were once restrictive, refraining the human from exhibiting normative abilities to process their external information, and also, re-elaborate the information back to people. The webinar depicts the relevancy of information processing and what can ascertain from further learning about the brain's inner frameworkings, such as the sensory, stored memory data. The more clinical psychologist, or any psychologist, no matter what field they're in, knows about information processing, the more we can adapt and strengthen advancing therapies that deal directly with memory recall, retention, and dexterities in which we absorb our external environments. I hope you guys have enjoyed watching this. Again, please leave any comments that you have below.